Well, hello, friends of the Holy Land family. We're recording this special conversation as we launch and share about a report that's come out from St. Andrew's Church in Ramallah, and we're going to be speaking to Father Fadi Diab, the rector there, and also the chair of our volunteer committee. My name is Adam May, and I'm privileged to be part of the Friends of the Holy Land family. But I'm also delighted to be joined by our executive director, Brendan Metcalfe. Brendan, we know that as we put out our material as a charity, there are people coming all the time and hearing about the work of Friends of the Holy Land. But just in a nutshell, Brendan, as we start our conversation, and before we introduce Father Fadi, would you just share a little bit about the work of Friends of the Holy Land? Who are we? What do we do?
So thank you, Adam. Yeah, Friends of the Holy Land, we're a relatively small charity with a large ambition. Our ambition is to help our brothers and sisters, the Christian communities which were founded by the apostles, to stay and remain in the Holy Land. And we do this through a mixture of helping with emergency needs. And obviously over the last 8 months, those emergency needs have been high. And we do that with other projects which are aimed to help them basically earn a living and see a future in the Holy Land through employment, through empowerment, through entrepreneurship. I was there only 2 days ago. I returned from the Holy Land, and I've seen some of that work in action and some of the terribly high need caused by this current situation. So we're a charity with a very direct and simple mission, and we are unique. We're registered as a charity in the UK, but we're also registered as a charity in Palestine. So we have our own staff, we have our own committee, of which Father Fadi is the chair, and we have our own bank account. So we can work quickly and directly to help and respond to people and communities and groups that need our support.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brendan. And I just know that if you haven't found out about the work of Friends of the Holy Land, or while you're listening to this conversation, you go, do you know what? I want to go and find out more about their work. friendsoftheholyland.org.uk is where you will find us online. And we're also on the social media channels as well. But Brendan, as you said there, Father Fadi chairs our volunteer committee in the Holy Land, all our work that goes on there. Father Fadi, it's a real delight and joy, and thank you for joining us for this conversation. But just very, very briefly, before we jump into the report, just introduce yourself to those of us who may not have had the privilege of meeting you yet, either online or in person.
Thank you, Adam. It's always a pleasure to join conversations with you and Brendan. My name is Fadi Diab, and I am an Anglican priest in the Diocese of Jerusalem. I serve the communities in Ramallah and Bir Zayt. And for the purpose of this conversation, I also chair the committee of Friends of the Holy Land in Bethlehem.
Thank you, Father Fadi. We're going to jump now into this report, and if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, you'll be able to see in the description a link to the report that we're discussing, so you can work your way through it, because there are a lot of things in this very helpful report, which Father Fadi, I'm right in saying came about at the beginning of this year. So I know it's taken some months for it to be published and widely shared, but you did a piece of work back at the beginning of the year. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. We did this report with the help of our friends in the UK, a volunteer friend who joined us during at the beginning of the year, and we worked with her and others in the community to learn more about the impulse of the Christian community during the challenging times that they're going through. And
it might sound like an odd question, but Father Fadi, while you're here and while we can have this conversation. Why do you think it is important? Because the title of this report is called A Research Study on the Impact of the Recent War on Palestinian Christians. Why do you believe it's important that we particularly shine a light on Palestinian Christians?
Well, I think the reason we wanted this research is to do a more thorough, research that goes deeper than what we hear in the news, to get to the grassroots, to listen to people, to learn from people, and not only political analysis on the screens. So we wanted, as I said, to hear the impulse, to hear the pulse of the community on the ground. And that is why we did all these interviews with young people, children, adults in the Ramallah area and the Bethlehem area, to learn from them about how they feel, in particular, how they feel after October 7th and the ongoing war on Gaza and the West Bank.
We're going to look, and I want to go and jump into some of those bits of stories. As I say, quite a substantive report. If we were to go through every single page, line by line by line, this would be a very long conversation. But Father Fadi, you talk about the fact in your foreword to this report that you talk about the fact that the situation is dire, using the statistics. And of course, there is just 1% of the Palestinian Christian community now at that, and that represents fewer than 800 Christians in Gaza. Just paint a bit of a picture before the conflict, so we put this into context, because I think sometimes when Brendan, you and I have talked about this many times, about how sometimes Christians over here in the UK put this into the too difficult box, or we can't understand what's really going on. So just before you jump into what this report found, just paint a bit of a picture, if you will, Father Fadi, just before, because the situation being dire, you and I have spoke about it when you were over here for your recent visit, about the situation being dire, but it was certainly dire before the 7th of October and the conflict.
Well, that is true, Adam. I think we always tend to forget the time and the challenges Palestinian community faces before the first week of October. And as you know, I think I mentioned this a lot, the Christian community comprised around 17% at the beginning of the century, the 20th century, and the number dropped to less than 1% in the Palestinian territories, and less than 2% in Israel. And I think the challenges the Christian community face has been there for more than a century. And as you know, the Christian community now is, like the majority of the Christian community, lives in exile. In Ramallah, for example, you have 90% of the community, the Christian community in Ramallah, lives in exile. And we have always advocated that the continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the continuation of the building of settlements, the blocking of roads, continues to put much pressure on the Christian community, leaving them with one choice: to leave. And I think that has been a strategy implemented for more than a century, and that unfortunately led to many Christians leaving the Holy Land. And that for us, this is not like immigrating from one place to other. For us, this is an existential threat, not to the Christian community, but also to the very essence of Christianity in the land of its birth.
And I think probably that says it all, Father Fadi. It feels like we could end the conversation there, because just the sense of you kind of go, it is affecting kind of Christianity and the living stones in the Holy Land. I wanted to jump into the research, if I may, because again, we could talk about this for hours. But I love the fact that you spoke to just a wide diversity of people for this piece of research. So, you spoke to young and old, right across the different communities. How many people did you actually speak to as part of this research?
Well, the research includes more than 100 people, and individuals and several groups. So there were like two kind of interviews, individual interviews and collective interviews. And collective interviews were made with students at classrooms, and youth groups at churches, and women's group at churches, and organizations, some leaders and employees at organizations. So we tried to cover different a variety of individuals and groups, but of course this was limited because we have very limited time to produce something. This was limited to Ramallah, the city of Ramallah, and the city of Bethlehem. And the reason we couldn't reach to others, as you know, Adam, moving around into in the West Bank is not something easy, especially during the first 3-4 months of the war. And the people who were doing this research were not able to move like to the north or go to other areas because of the restriction of movements.
I want to jump into the findings, if that's okay, Father Fadi. So you talk about the fact in the first finding of this research talks about the fact of the increased level of fear and uncertainty for Palestinian Christians, and the fact that has increased significantly since the 7th of October. And in there, it's really interesting to say that there's a line that says one person expressed the worry that Christians might become an oppressed minority within an oppressed minority. Just speak into a little bit more for us about that in terms of that level of fear and uncertainty that Palestinian Christians are facing.
Well, Adam, I think when you live in an ongoing conflict for more than a century, because as you know, the conflict did not start even in 1948. It started way years before that. So if your grandparent was born in a conflict, if your parent was born under occupation, if you are born under occupation, and if your children are born under occupation, then you have 4 or 5 generations of individuals and communities living under occupation. And sometimes they lose hope of, especially when there is a tense crisis like a war, there is a refusal of giving you your freedom and self-determination. And I think you start to feel anxious about the future, and you enter into a state of fear, if not about the present, then about the future, and fear about your children and their future. And then that kind of uncertainty penetrates not only the social fabric, but also psychologically. It penetrates your psyche, your thinking, and it causes people it causes them to feel depressed because they have no way out of this.
And I think that then leads on to the kind of second finding of this report that talks about the fact that many Palestinian Christian families, and it's interesting that you say in the report about how this was something that nearly all of the families felt, that sense of wanting or considering seriously that need to leave the West Bank and immigrate and immigrating to places like the US, Canada, and other places. The statistic that kind of jumped out to me as I read the report was actually the bit in the paragraph that says, according to the president of a Catholic organization in Bethlehem, at least 10 Catholic families comprising of almost 50 people have left since the 7th of October. And that then also goes on to say, although couldn't be verified, that 34 families from other Christian denominations have left as well. And obviously that this report has been produced in February, and now anticipating that the statistic is now significantly higher now. Just kind of paint a picture now. What do the numbers look like now, Father Fadi?
Well, I think As you know, Adam, before the war, there was about 1,000 people, were 1,000 people in Gaza. Today, they're less than 600. So 400 people, 40% of the community of Gaza left. Unfortunately, some of them left through, paying a lot of money to smugglers to cross to Egypt. And we know that most of the people in Gaza who lost their homes and their children lost their schools, they now contemplate leaving. What worries me is not only the number of people who have left since the first week of October, but what worries me, the continuous attempts of young people trying to leave. I would say like every day or every other day, I receive a phone call from someone who seeks my advice how to apply for a visa or how to immigrate. And most of the people ask me that, one of the things people ask, especially when it comes to churches, about sponsorship. They want parishes in the West to sponsor them. And, they ask me to find churches for them or congregations who would sponsor their immigration. So I know people already applied for the lottery, U.S. lottery program. I know many people who went, just to get a visa. If they're not immigrating, they want something ready. They want a visa on their passports, even if they're not leaving, but they want, an immediate response if something happens.
And I think that then goes on to kind of the next point about the kind of just the psychological level of stress that you talk about. Many of the Palestinian Anglican congregants that I'm sure are part of your parish saying, there's a line in there that says, many of the people stated that they just wish that things could get back to normal, quote unquote. And it then goes on to say that although many of the respondents felt that, actually there was a particular impact upon young people and young people saying that, life is very, very different for a young person. Father, just paint a bit of a picture, because we're going to pick up this in terms of the recommendations in a little while. But what's it like as a young person? What do young people come and say to you as a priest about life?
Well, I think, Adam, I think time has changed since I was a young, youth in my hometown some 30, 40 years ago. In the time of globalization and media and internet, our young people see the world around them. And when they see the world, they do the comparison between their own worlds and the rest of the world. And I think that is the main reason why people are getting much frustration about their lives. And I think it is very, very important to take care of these young children and young people, because their frustration is leading to isolation, and their isolation is leading to anxiety and depression. And we have seen this in many different cases, particularly at schools, and a lot of violence because of the frustration they're seeing. Unfortunately, there is there is very little control on the reception of news and information that is getting into these, children and young people. So they know every single, violent act happening around them, and that is, I think, affecting their behavior and their well-being. Now, these children, when they look through the media to the Western world in particular, and see the kind of freedom people live, then they compare it with their own, restrictions imposed on them by the Israeli occupation. And they look at the West as a way as a place of opportunity and chances where they have no opportunity and no chance to work out in their own context. We as leaders, religious leaders in the communities, we pay much attention to these feelings, and we try our best through meetings with them, through supporting them through different activities and programs, like the one we did at St. Andrews with the trauma healing program, just to help them vent their emotions, vent their thinking, and try to help them to see a better future despite the difficult situation we are living in.
Father Fadi, before we move on to the next recommendation, I want to ask you a question. Paint a picture from your perspective, because in the report, you know, there are other stories of other people we've spoken to, but just paint a bit of a picture for us in terms of your own experience. We're going to talk about the fact that there's a line in there for the next recommendation that says, but to go to Jerusalem is just a dream. And Brendan was telling me, Father Fadi, that you, even as a parish priest, have lived a very closed life since the start of the conflict. And you're a priest, so you have probably better opportunity to get out than most, but that sense of just being able to get out and around the region has been a real challenge. Paint a bit of a picture for me in terms of your own experience.
Well, first of all, you need and to understand that since the Second Intifada, Israel imposed closures on cities, villages, and roads. And today, there are more than 600, 700 checkpoints inside the West Bank, separating every city and village from its neighboring city and village. So in order to go to Hebron the other day, I cannot go through Jerusalem, which is through Jerusalem an hour drive, and I had to go a 3-hour drive to Hebron for a meeting for an hour. So you can imagine traveling is becoming more of a hardship that many people avoid. Going into Jerusalem and presenting your papers at a checkpoint and feeling the tension and the anger of the soldiers, or not knowing what might happen when you cross the checkpoint, or knowing what might happen when you are inside Jerusalem, makes traveling and going from one place to another a nightmare. And that's why people tend to travel only when necessary. As a priest, of course, as a Palestinian first, I need a permit to go into Jerusalem like all other Palestinians. But as a priest, I have some privilege because, the diocese is in Jerusalem and the diocese applies for permits for its clergy. So we have a privilege of getting permits to go into Jerusalem that many Christians in the West Bank don't have. And to give you an example, last Sunday it was Pentecost in Jerusalem. And Pentecost is a special day for the Diocese of Jerusalem, and of course for everyone, but in particular for the Diocese of Jerusalem, because all parishes inside the West Bank and inside Israel come together at the cathedral and celebrate Pentecost together. So there will be like 700, 800, 1,000 people at the cathedral celebrating Pentecost. But this year, none of the parishes inside the West Bank were able to join the celebration in Jerusalem. So as you know, Jerusalem is like 10 miles south of Ramallah, and it's sad that the indigenous Christian community who have lived in the Holy Land for 2,000 years cannot reach their holy places in Jerusalem, or meet with their holy community in Jerusalem because of the restrictions imposed on them. And that is, when you feel that pain, it is very sad. And that pain creates more anger inside not only the Christian community, but everyone who listened to these stories.
I think that then takes us on to the next kind of fifth recommendation or finding of this report, to say about the fact that, the economy has been completely strangulized. I thought it was a really powerful way of putting about this, the economic strangulation across the West Bank since the 7th of October. And obviously we know that for Christians, an awful lot of work is done around the whole area around tourism, which is obviously isn't happening because of the conflict. But the thing that kind of struck me, and I don't know it's because of what's going on in here in the UK and conversations around the cost of living, but to hear the line written from one of the shopkeepers in Bethlehem just saying literally the prices of everything just go and keep up and up and up and up. And actually that relationship of trust between people and their banks is just at a record low.
Yeah, I think the economic crisis is unprecedented during these months. The Christian community, like the rest of the Palestinian community, faces, or has been facing economic hardships for many years because of the restrictions the Israeli government is putting on transferring funds to the Palestinian Authority. And I know that there are, teachers and doctors and nurses who haven't received their full salary in the last 4 years. They only receive like 50% or 60% of their salaries. Now, the economy was already devastated prior to October 7th. But since October 7th, it's been collapsing. And mainly because of the devastation of the hospitality and pilgrimage industry, especially in areas like Bethlehem, Hebron, Jericho, Nablus, and other areas that received a lot of pilgrims in the past. But also because Israel revoked all permits for workers, for Palestinian workers who used to go to Israel to work. And many of these workers are Palestinian Christians as well. So that caused huge hardships for many families. That it also puts more stress on the churches to respond to these needs. And to organizations like the FHL to respond to the necessary needs that people have because of that. As you know, we are restricted from moving, trading. Farmers are restricting from reaching their farms, growing their crops. Even in Gaza, the whole agriculture industry is gone. That is also true in many parts in the West Bank, where farmers cannot get their crops to the market, or they cannot grow and get to their fields to pick up their crops. So eventually life almost stopped since the first week of October from an economic standpoint. And that is why many Palestinian families suffer. I just want to include that we're very much under pressure of this government, because 2 days ago, the government has put much more economic pressure on the Palestinian government responding or retaliating against the recognition of 3 European states recognizing the state of Palestine. So in response to that recognition, much more pressure is put under the Palestinian economy in particular. And leading, I was listening to the news this morning, leading to almost collapsing. And that is really scary, because the whole Palestinian system will collapse, especially after restrictions with dealing with Palestinian banks, meaning that the whole financial system is collapsing.
I don't know how you respond to that, other than to say we do need to make a response, and we will come on to that. Father Fadi, every time that we have spoken since the 7th of October, this next finding has been a kind of topic of our conversation. And it's really important for us as Friends of the Holy Land and FHL to make sure that this message is being heard across the church. And that sense about increased disillusionment and that sense of abandonment by Christians across the world to the plight of Palestinian Christians, it is just horrific about just how much my heart breaks as I see and hear the stories about how much that abandonment is being lived up, particularly by members of the Christian community, as well as clergy and not just Anglican clergy, but clergy right across ecumenically in the Holy Land. But I did take hope, Father Fadi, from the line that says, we have no choice but to keep going. We have hope. We trust in God. We hope for a better future. If you have hope, then you can live, said somebody. But just paint a bit of a picture, because again, this is February, and we know, and leaders across the different churches have said, we're sorry for the way in which we've been abandoning our Christian brothers and sisters. Just kind of paint a kind of picture of kind of back at the beginning of the year, but also maybe where we are now. Do you think things have got better in terms of that? Solidarity and Christians here, particularly in the UK, standing with Palestinian Christians in the Holy Land?
Well, thank you, Adam. I think we've talked about this a lot. Since for many years, Palestinian Christians felt that they are forgotten by the international community and by the international church. And it was hard for them to believe the amount of destruction and the huge numbers of people killed with very little response from the international church. And that is why many Christians in the West Bank felt abandoned by their siblings around the world. But having said that, we all have noticed a change in many positions of leaders and church leaders and even civil leaders about what is happening. And I think there is more solidarity visits by church leaders. There is more solidarity visit by organizations, church or faith-based organizations. And we are receiving more and more encouragement letters and support from churches and Christian bodies around the world. And I think the reason for that was the advocacy that the church led and friends of the Palestinian people led around the world, and the marches in many cities in the world advocating the Palestinian cause. So there is a sense of change. There is a change, but I think that doesn't mean that the Palestinian community doesn't feel still abandoned by the international the international community, not only the international church, but in particular the international community as led by the supreme powers around the world. But having said that, Adam, I think 2,000 years this Christian community has been living in this land, and it went through different and difficult challenges throughout these 1,000 years. They never lost hope, and many of them did not opt to leave, but to remain in the land, because our hope is in God and in his son Jesus Christ, who on the cross revealed to us that the empire does not have the last sentence. And in the resurrection of Jesus, God has the last sentence. God has the last word in our life. Even though it is hard, we trust God. We trust his providence and his love. We trust his care. We trust that he is among his community. And we trust that this too will pass eventually, and we will rise stronger, hopeful, building a future for our children and for everyone in this land.
Thank you, Father Fadi. It's just a real encouragement to hear you say that at the end, because obviously it's written in the report, but just to hear you speak that out, really, really important. There will be some bishops, Church of England bishops, who will be watching this conversation and listening into this conversation. And there is, and I just think, because I know you went and saw His Grace, the Archbishop of Canterbury, when you had your recent visit, there is something, and members of the congregation at St Andrew's wrote and criticised the Archbishop of Canterbury, particularly for his leadership. You know, where are we at now in terms of particularly the repairing or rebuilding, or just that sense of trust with the Archbishop of Canterbury?
Well, we do respect, of course, and love the Archbishop of Canterbury and all our religious leaders around the world. We do respect them. We do respect their statements and their position. But we wanted, or the community who wrote the letter, and through my visit and discussion, talking with the Archbishop, we wanted him also to hear the voice of the people on the ground, the grassroots, and to learn more about the challenges the Palestinian community and the Palestinian Christian community in particular is facing. And I think we have seen more attention and more change in the Archbishop's statements. And I think we are very appreciative for his follow-up on Layan's case. And I think he's very much himself worried about what is happening on the ground and about the future and the prosperity of the Christian community.
And has bishops that have been to visit since your meeting with the Archbishop, Bishop Christopher, the Bishop of Southwark, Bishop Gooley, the Bishop of Chelmsford, and I know there are, I don't know, we're not allowed to say who else might be popping out to see the Christian community, but there will be no doubt other bishops going. Do you think that has that helped to obviously seeing the Christian community at the grassroots?
Yeah, I think you know, travel restrictions to Israel Palestine are imposed by many countries around the world, and it's not easy to travel. But we have received church leaders from different parts of the world, including Bishop Chesson and Bishop Gooley, and I think the recent visit of Bishop Gooley was very much appreciated by the community, especially when Bishop Guli visited Layanne's family, and she was very sympathetic to her case, and prayed with the family, and she met with other people in the community. And I think such visits of church leaders from around the world provide encouragement to the Christian community on the ground.
I think the thing that we're going to draw this conversation to say, and so what, in a second, and I'm going to invite Brendan to come back in and join our conversation. He's probably been listening patiently, Father Fadi, to our conversation, which I very much enjoyed. But the striking image was that social media post that Bishop Guli put of the candle in her chapel that prays every day until we see the release of your congregation member, who obviously is still being detained. And obviously that sign of real solidarity, of not just being there in the conversation with the family, but actually continuing to light that candle, stand in solidarity as we move forward. Brendan, you've been listening to the conversation. Some of that stuff that Father Fadi's been sharing, you've heard before. Some of it I hope is maybe a little bit new, because we never quite know what Father Fadi is going to say, which is always a joy to have a conversation with Father Fadi. But Brendan, how are we as Friends of the Holy Land going to respond to this report that's we're launching and communicating?
Well, I think, Adam, firstly, we have been responding since the terrible events of October began, and we've been responding primarily by ensuring that we have increased our support for emergency help for those in need. And I mean emergency help for people who, can't afford their utilities, who can't afford their medication, for their chronic illnesses, who need help with small procedures that they no longer can afford. We've also been directly helping the communities operating the Al Ahly Hospital, the communities that were sheltering in the two churches. Unfortunately, that ability to help directly stopped at the beginning of this year as the banking system broke down. And we're very fortunate. We have our own bank account in Palestine, and up until January, we were able to make direct help to those situations, but we haven't recently. But I was out there, as I mentioned earlier. I only came back on a Wednesday, so that's just 2 days ago. And, as part of that visit, I spent a lot of time with Father Fadi. I spent a lot of time with our other committee members. I spent a lot of time with organizations on the ground who we have worked with in the past. And, building upon these findings, these results from the survey, we are developing rapidly programs to bring support. I mean, and I could go into all the different details, of which I won't at this time. The extent of the crisis is worse than I have ever seen. I want to say that. I spent time walking around Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, in a way, is a little bit insulated because there are still people visiting Jerusalem, both on day trips from Jordan, from trips from Asia, where they're perhaps a bit more tolerant of the advice and the crisis that people see before them. But Jerusalem was a ghost town. And for people who have been, let me say, I walked into the Holy Sepulchre. I spent about an hour there walking around, and I counted maybe 20 people other than monks and priests who were there. So, I had time to dig into the nooks and crannies, which you never usually get the opportunity to do. Then going into the West Bank, it was even more of a shock. What do I mean by that? I didn't see anybody other than perhaps a UN truck of people who were not from Palestine. Yeah. The hotels were closed. I stayed in a hotel in Bethlehem which has about 150 rooms. I was the only person in the hotel. It was almost embarrassing because the staff were, hovering on my every command. And this was the only hotel that was open pretty much. The shops, the souvenir shops were all closed. Contrast actually to Jerusalem, where quite a few shops were open but getting no business. The shops had given up. The only places really open were food stores and the traditional stores to get spices and nuts and things like that. There were one or two shops open in Manger Square, which, I out of great pity almost went to see and visit. And, they were telling me that they were lucky if they were getting 20 shekels a week of business, which to give it, that's about £5. So nothing. And it was so sad to see. And then again, the other side was just the explanation as to how much more difficult life had become. Getting into Bethlehem, if you've been before, one generally goes through the 300 gate. On the date I arrived, for some reason, that gate was closed. So we had to go all the way around and come in through Beit Jala, which in itself is an extra sort of 45-minute drive around before you get into the area. When we were leaving, capriciously, the 300 gate was open. But again, the security is such that the queue was much longer than usual. We were lucky there were no coaches in it because it was taking, the inspection of each vehicle was much greater, including my vehicle, which I'd not really seen before, because usually as a foreigner, you get a cursory look when you're with the driver going through the gate, but they made us stop and they asked us questions and opened the doors and everything else. And again, almost capricious changes. In the lead up to the gate, they dug rivets in the road, so there was sort of ditches about almost a foot deep and a foot wide, so that just driving to the checkpoint, the car had to really slow down, and you felt very uncomfortable. And that's just me as a personal impression. Overall, though, I must say, both walking around Jerusalem and walking around the West Bank, I felt most welcome. People came up to me, people warmly greeted me. I didn't feel at all in any form of personal danger. And I just felt that I wanted to help, be engaged with and support these people as much as I could. So that's where Friends of the Holy Land sits now. We are getting daily updates of what is happening from our contacts on the ground, like Father Fadi, from our great relationships with the other organizations. We are building our existing programs and engaging and developing new ones very quickly to work in the areas that you have discussed with Father Fadi, and a particular focus on the youth. I mean, particularly relevant to the UK because it's the headquarters of the Scouting movement. I met with the leaders of the Christian Scouts, both Orthodox, Latin, and I know Father Fadi is talking with the Anglican Church, so we can see how we can work together with the Scouts. And it must be said, they can trace their heritage as Scouts. I think it's one of the oldest Christian organizations sort of for youth in the Holy Land. Some of the people I was talking to represented troops, I think they're called, or groups that go back to the 1920, very proudly helping young people since then. So that's an example of a great area that we are hoping to build upon, helping the youth cope with this terrible situation.
we are nearly close to an hour. So thank you for those of you that have joined and been listening all the way throughout. Well done for the stamina if you've listened to all of the conversation, but a really important conversation for us to be having as Friends of the Holy Land. And let me encourage you again, if you've not checked out the website, friendsoftheholyland.org.uk, lots of information on there. If you want to read the report and the research that Father Fadi and I have been discussing, it will be on the website. It will also be on the description to this video by whichever mechanism you are watching this, because we want to continue the conversation. But we thought it was really important as we move forward. We're going to be sharing in a lot more detail some of the things that arise out of specifics in terms of around empowerment and youth and other things. So this is going to come in the very, very near future. We want to respond. We have been, as Brendan said, responding to this report, and we've been responding to the conflict, but we need to keep ramping that up, and we need the church here in the UK to be involved in that. So we're going to be sharing a lot more coming soon, but we wanted to just have this conversation initially to let you know what this report had said that came out of St Andrew's Church in Ramallah. And we thank Father Fadi on behalf of the researcher and the whole team that put that report together. So thank you, Father Fadi, for that. Just before we go, Father Fadi, what can we particularly pray for now in terms of your work and beginning to enable what's in the report and the things that have developed since to come to fruition? What can we pray?
Well, thank you, Adam. I think since we're talking about the report and the findings, and since that report was made of the many voices who are struggling during these days, I think it would be really important to pray for these struggling voices, these struggling people who are trying to find their way through these challenging times, and who are trying to find a light at the end of the tunnel and a hope for the future. So yeah, we'll continue to pray for the end of this war, for a ceasefire, and we will continue to pray for strengthening the Christian church and the Christian mission to continue to serve its communities and the surrounding communities. But yeah, I think in particular, I would say, let us pray for these marginalized, disenfranchised voices that we talked about today.
Thank you, Father Fadi. I think the only response is, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. More will emerge in the coming days. Keep an eye out on Facebook and on YouTube, on our website, the e-news, and all of the correspondence that Friends of the Holy Land put out to keep, as Brendan said, up to date with all that's going on. But for now, thank you, Father Fadi. Thank you, Brendan, for your time. And
thank you, Brendan.
Those of you that have been listening and watching. God bless you.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.